Everyone assumed they were familiar with the Milli Vanilli tale. Due to their lip-syncing, 2 men were disqualified from receiving Grammy Awards. When performed improperly, lip-sync is like throwing gasoline on a fire. Our initial response was, but producer Frank Farian finally told the whole truth before he died in 2024. His revelations extended beyond the topic of false singing. In it, a machine that could transform actual musicians into ghost sounds and make imposter musicians famous was the main plot point. Everyone is lying, says the music. Businesses and labels were aware. In what ways was it shocking? For Farian, there was more than just one instance. Nobody intervened with him until after he had already committed this crime for a long time. The little German town of Karna was the site of his birth on July 18, 1941, as France Royther. Bombs were falling, communities were on fire, and Germany was in utter anarchy as the war drew to a close. Even Karna took a hit. There were rumbling walls, the sound of sirens, and the smell of starvation. Frank was born into that world. A place where chaos reigned and where people feared for their safety. Buildings crumbled and mothers sobbed for their children who were born during that era. They quickly realized the significance of taking the lead. Since Frank's father perished in battle before he was born, Frank was never able to meet him. He had this sense of powerlessness for quite some time. Working tirelessly to make ends meet in a devastated Germany, his mom brought up 3 children on her own. Good schools, tranquility, and assistance were non-existent. Never in his life did Frank hear his father's voice. Even his memories were gone, leaving him with nothing to cling to. No sound could be heard. Being apart from someone of that caliber altered his perspective on life. It was more than just a void. He realized he couldn't rely on anybody else. He observed people intently and came to the realization that he needed to take the lead for things to work out. In terms of his entire environment, not merely his own existence. Germany was gradually reassembling itself between 1945 and 1955, when the war ended and the sky turned gray. Not much joy was felt. People were upset, had low self-esteem, and had little money. One peculiar light, though, was music. American music styles such as jazz and rock and roll made their way to Europe. This music was like magic to a little child who had only ever gone to air raid bunkers and soup queues. Its volume outstripped that of hunger. It outweighed dread. He found it to be more than simply enjoyable. He went somewhere with that. Something else rather than pain he felt. Not to mention how trapped you felt. Truthfully, he had little interest in pursuing a career in music. He wished he could afford other folks the chance to do the same. Like it had saved his life, he saw music as a tool that could be utilized to manage feelings. As early as the age of 16, Frank had had enough of being French. The name conjured images of the idealized version of himself, which he despised. He made the alteration. Suddenly, he was Frank Farian. This was planned. Since Frank didn't have the same German accent, he was more marketable. Strange sounding. Farian. His desire to create music extended beyond that. His goal was to deceive others. The first illusion he had was bestowed upon him by himself. Who he was should not have been known by anyone. Trusting his word was all that was required of them. His life's rule is to always put more stock in what other people think about you than in your own character. It manifested itself even in the classroom. A band was formed by him. It was non-existent. He would invent stories, characters, and identities merely to attract the attention of girls. That was successful. He was believed by his buddies. His inflated sense of self-importance and dishonesty won him admiration. At that moment, it hit him. Nobody cared if it was accurate or not. To them, it should have a nice appearance and sound. Being good wasn't necessary for him. There was a play he had to watch. With each new belief, he felt stronger. He dabbled with art during the 60s. Even though he started out learning how to cook, his true passion was music. He recorded and released music as Frankie Boy Shatton. His 1964 first single, Shouting Ghost, was an enormous success. The next years brought Under the Boardwalk, 1965, Yakata Yak, 1964, and Mr. in 1967, but it was all for naught. Nobody cared. Doors didn't open or close. Nobody wanted to see his face. His appearance didn't match the genre, even though his voice did. Rejection wasn't only hurtful, It taught him both good and bad things. Picture was more important than sound, and he would find a way to take advantage of those who were. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, he worked in studios, singing background vocals, playing for other people, going uncredited, and witnessing the rise to stardom of actors who weren't very good at what they did simply because they looked the part. In 1969, he released Ein Kissen für Treue, and in 1970 and 1971, he released Speedy Jack. However, these albums were still unremarkable, and he encountered widespread rejection. Despite this, he persisted, becoming both cooler and smarter. Once he recorded Baby, Do You Want a Bump? Everything changed. When it came time for him to perform it live in 1975, he knew he needed help, even though he sang on it himself. He devised a scheme to circumvent the rhythms, which he dubbed Boney M. Two of the four faces would sing live, while the other two, including a dancer named Bobby Farrell, would merely move their lips. The truth didn't have to be known. He never imagined the deception would be so effective. In 1976, Daddy Cool became an enormous hit. Rivers of Babylon and Ma Baker were global smash hits by 1978, but his greatest personal success was a complete surprise. In 1976, a German version of Rocky reached #1 and remained there for 4 weeks. He should have been proud of that moment, but he wasn't because he had already tried something better than fame, power. In the early 1970s, he started to learn how to manipulate his voice. He could change his voice over tape, making it deeper, stronger, and more emotional. He also used these techniques to give the groups he produced fake voices. That man's voice you heard in Boney M songs? That wasn't Bobby Farrell. It was Frank. Boyd danced. Nobody knew that Bobby never sang, even though he looked cool. Fans demanded a voice that wasn't even theirs. Frank was busy receiving money and arranging things. The only women who really sang were Liz Mitchell and Marcia Barrett. Everything else was just a dream. Although every performance and single was an elaborate hoax, the album sold over 100 million copies and brought joy all over the globe while Frank remained hidden, growing richer and stronger with each passing year. The group's public face, Bobby Farrell, had no say in the music, had no say in songwriting or profits. He was cast based on his appearance, not his voice. Frank was looking to attract an exotic cast for his European show, and Bobby's Caribbean heritage was a perfect fit. However, he was only in Frank's show. The music, lyrics, and production were all handled by one man for a flat rate, and Frank kept the money he made. In 1988, Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan were starving, impoverished, and completely unknown to Munich's music industry. There was a night in a club when Frank Farian, who lived in a housing project and had to steal food to survive, saw more than 2 dancers. He saw money. Frank didn't care that they weren't singers. He didn't even ask. All he saw were their faces, bodies, and movements. The ideal candidate for MTV would be an attractive, original, and fascinating individual. This was something Farian had done previously. After creating Boney M in the 1970s, one of the dancers lip-synced his own voice for over 20 years. He was planning to do it again, but this time it would be bigger. He spilled the beans to Rob and Fab when they spoke to him, offering them $4 grand in a dream, paying them fees in the process. He assured them they would become renowned, and that they would compose their own music someday. The contracts were in German, which Morvan had trouble understanding. Little did they know that they had just signed away their freedom to freely express themselves. Farian had secretly set up a mechanism to do just that. The Rocco sisters, John Davis, and Brad Howell were among the actual musicians he secretly assembled. They were not allowed to meet Rob and Fab, and the entire session was recorded in silence. Davis had served in the U.S. Army and remained in Germany to sing. Howell was the only one in a union, so he received residuals instead of flat fees, and Shaw received $6 grand for rapping on Girl You Know It's True. Shaw was paid $150,000 to shut up, but as his fame grew, he couldn't keep lying. In December 1989, he told the truth to a reporter, which scared Farian. Farian then fired Shaw and hired Davis instead. The building looked like a bunker in Farian's workshop. The real singers worked upstairs, while Rob and Fab were kept downstairs by the pool. As Linda Rocco recalled, things started to go wrong when Arista Records became involved. Originally, they were rushed to record only 4 songs, and Rob and Fab didn't sing a note on the entire album, but their names were on it. The record sold 6 million copies. Out of it emerged 3 top-charting singles. While everyone assumed it was their vocals, Fab and Rob weren't convinced. Despite their repeated requests, Farian refused to let them sing. Nevertheless, they clung to optimism, telling themselves, maybe on the next tour or the next album. Instead, they were sent all over Europe to lip-sync while Farian sewed their hair into braids, wore tights and boots, and made sure they were visible in every country. France, Italy, and Spain were no exception. By the time the record was released in the US in March 1989, they were already in the midst of a financially lucrative deception, but they had no say in the matter and Arista Records likely knew. According to their former manager, leaders like Clive Davis were informed 6 months before the Grammys. Rob and Fab went so far as to claim that they had informed Davis and others that they hadn't sung. Ken Levy, who worked in creative services at Arista, said that when the duo won Best New Artist in February 1990, it made everyone feel awkward. The label didn't admit ignorance until November, when Roy Lott said it was impossible for anyone to have known. The resulting business lie on top of a personal one caused terrible damage to their minds. Fab said that the fear never went away, and Rob said that most of the time they felt safe, but every day they were afraid. They begged Farian to let them sing, but he said no. They were scared that someone would find out. On July 21, 1989, during a live show, the backing track skipped. Girl, you know it's girl, you know it's played over and over. Rob stopped moving and left the stage. That Club MTV moment was the beginning of the end. However, Farian didn't end the show. He made them keep going for another 15 months. By November 1990, Rob and Fab had finished, but they hadn't given up singing. Farian had fired them, not simply told them no. Their jobs had begun to crumble. From starving dancers to global megastars and back again, the system had used their dream to hurt them. Rob had said it before, "We lived in a project. Neither of us had any budget." At the Grammys on February 22, 1990, Milli Vanilli accepted the trophy for Best New Artist while the audience erupted in jubilation over a song they hadn't even contributed vocals to, Girl, You Know It's True, which had sold over 14 million copies globally. Their manager Frank Farian knew they hadn't sung a word. The Grammy committee didn't even look. They believed what the record credits said. The album had 5 songs that reached the top of the charts and sold 8 million copies on their own, bringing in more than $50 million. However, the truth was darker. The group was chosen over actual artists like Soul to Soul and Nene Cherry. In 1989, at a concert in Milwaukee with 22,000 people, the truth began to leak out, and Milli Vanilli became the first and only act in Grammy history to have their award revoked. This happened on November 19, 1990, barely 9 months after their biggest night. Everything began to fall apart. In a recent interview with MTV, Rob Pattis revealed, "I wanted to die." He continued, "I couldn't fake it again. I'm fed up with the lies. It makes me feel like a bug is being squeezed." The LA Times reported that the last 2 years of their lives have been a nightmare, and Rob Pattis had the microphone in his hand and was ready to sing when something went wrong. Pattis then locked himself in the bus after a violent altercation with the tour manager. Now Rob and Fab were begging to include actual songs in their upcoming album. That demand would put a stop to everything, and they couldn't continue acting as if nothing was wrong. A posh supper was hosted atop New York's World Trade Center 12 months earlier, on August 30, 1989. The venue was 107 stories above at the window on the World Diner. Sitting at a table with Rob, Fab, and Farian were a few individuals from Arista Records. They were frightened. The reporters started to suspect Rob and Fab whenever they spoke with their heavy French or German accents. Think about it. These guys can't have sang that. Arista's boss, Clive Davis, even proposed employing a dialect coach. It was that convincingly fake. They had to adopt an American accent to maintain the show's continuity. To Farian, they were insignificant. He believed their accents were the cherry on top that would make the whole ruse fall flat. This is why Arista included speech therapists in their tour expenses. Those seated at that table were well aware of the dangers of speaking their minds. Behind the scenes, things deteriorated further. At that dinner, it wasn't only about teaching voices. It was crisis management, according to Todd Headley, who was previously in charge of them. The guys weren't the actual vocalists, and Arista knew it that night. They began meeting in secret from that point on. Confidentiality agreements were signed by both parties. They braced themselves for the worst. Farian frequently traveled to and from Los Angeles for private talks with high-ranking executives. Keeping the money rolling in while keeping the facts hidden was their common goal as the rumors circulated throughout 1989 and into 1990. However, Rob and Fab had exhausted all possible options. They pleaded to perform after receiving the Grammy. After Arista and Farian declined, the two became even closer. They found out that they had a legal need to make multiple records. They couldn't get out of it. For lack of an alternative, they acted recklessly. Then they threatened to tell everyone on live German TV that Farian would have to pay them $150,000, which was a bad idea. Although they were prepared to murder Farian, they were also aware that the truth would destroy them if they revealed the falsehood. The plan was successful, at least temporarily. Even though Farian realized he was out of control, he still paid. On November 14, 1990, just 5 days after, Farian subsequently took action. He flew to New York to meet with reporters. He wasted no time evading capture. As a first step, he showed them. Fab and Rob were let go, he informed everyone. He insisted such noises weren't actually singers. He mentioned Brad Howell, Charles Shaw, and John Davis as the names of the actual musicians. He proceeded to portray himself as an intelligent genius who had merely completed the necessary tasks. Its appearance appealed to him. It was pleasant listening. It was purchased by many fans. So what if he was wrong? His bravery betrayed his intelligence, as if he were being misunderstood. Throwing Rob and Fab into the fire, he hurled himself to safety. Arista Records quickly parted ways with Rob and Fab. Despite the record's success, it was pulled from shelves. The Grammys rescinded the prize 5 days after Farian revealed his actions, on November 19, 1990. Never before had anything like this occurred at the Grammys. Though unharmed, the men in suits were Rob and Fab. Others, such as Clive Davis, remained in positions of authority. Sandy Gallon maintained his honor. Rob and Fab were treated poorly by the media. They were mocked for being dishonest and deceitful. The directors, managers, and record labels who orchestrated the swindle and ensured its security went unmentioned. Because they were the true builders, nobody was ever in hot water. The fans were irate. The statement was made on November 22, 1990, which was just 3 days later. A lawsuit was first filed. In order to recover her funds, an Ohioan went to court. In her state alone, over 1,000 people had purchased the record. More claims poured in shortly after. Some consumer fraud regulations were used. Arista was accused of racketeering by some. An elite group of national class action attorneys intervened. An August 12, 1991, settlement offer was rejected in Chicago due to its exclusive inclusion of Arista song credits. On August 28, 1991, a genuine agreement was reached. The CD or concert tickets could be refunded to the buyers. It might have been done by 10 million individuals. They received their money back, but the record was theirs to keep. Claims were due no later than March 8, 1992. Upon eventually telling Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan the truth in November 1990, Frank Farian wasted no time. A chance to increase his wealth arose from the scandal that ought to have ended his career. 2 fresh people were brought to light by him in no time at all. The actual singers behind Milli Vanilli's most famous songs are John Davis and Brad Howell. The true Milli Vanilli were now widely recognized. In 1991, a record titled The Moment of Truth was released. The name wasn't insignificant. To the people he had abused and abandoned, it was an obscene insult. Out of its 3 tracks, Keep On Running peaked at number 4 in Germany. However, the concept was never brought to the US. The mask's removal was witnessed by all. Farian was attempting to increase his wealth by continuing to speak the same falsehoods that had made him wealthy. At this point, he revealed no one but the faces he had previously buried. While Farian retreated behind his new machine, Rob and Fab were the targets of mockery in every news report and late-night joke. Twice he was paid. An initial step was to give the impression that the frontmen were genuine. Then they came clean and said they weren't. Rob was never better. In 1998, he was confronted with everything. A heroin overdose was the cause of his death. Although the specific date remained confidential, the fact that it was final was of paramount importance. He intended to return. He and Fab were working on a new album, Back and in Attack, but it was never released. Recalling their last encounter, Fab reflected about Rob. It was on Sunset Strip in Los Angeles. Rob appeared to have lost all vision. "I can see it," Fab claimed. Now that his brother had departed, he could never bring him back. When Rob needed support, he never received it. Substance abuse helped him cope with the overwhelming sense of loss, shame, and guilt he felt as a result of his ordeal. And ultimately, it shattered him. There was no emotion on Farian's face when he learned of his death. His apologies were wanting. He remained silent. He continued going without saying a word. Farian continued to deceive even after 30 years had passed. A number of times he altered his account. Record labels, he claimed, would occasionally coerce him into doing it. On other occasions, he claimed that Rob and Fab were always aware. On occasion, he would claim that it was just transient. He was dishonest at all times. Depending on who was listening, he would always alter his words. He had a conversation with Matthias Schweihofer, who would portray him in an upcoming film, just before he passed away in 2024. The question of whether Farian felt remorse about the infamous press conference on November 14, 1990, went unanswered. He stated that he was still furious. All many years later, he was just as angry as ever. Anger, not remorse or contemplation. According to Matthias, Farian enjoyed having command. A direct response would elude him. He would not even mention Rob's demise. Until the very end, he persisted in erasing and rewriting events in order to shield himself. The COVID-19 pandemic claimed John Davis's life on May 24, 2021, in Nuremberg, Germany. One of the actual voices behind the hits was him. There are 66. He had lived his entire life disguising himself as a noise. He was the one who sang and performed the music, but nobody knew his name. He currently resides in Germany, although his birthplace was South Carolina. More than 30 million copies of songs featuring his voice have sold. His death was largely unrecognized. In his online tribute, his daughter humbly requested a final round of applause for the man whose infectious laughter, infectious grin, and boundless energy brought joy to countless others. However, many remained in the dark about his identity. His entire career had been eclipsed by another's. Even the music industry preferred to forget. People who knew or had strong suspicions about the truth were just as prevalent as those who helped disseminate the falsehood. They remained silent for a long time. Silence was their response. Rob and Fab were allowed to escape punishment. Farian was free to keep the money. Everything else vanished. Those individuals continued to deny or claim ignorance even when films surfaced in the 2020s demonstrating that this was a massive industrial operation and not the work of a single con artist. Powerful individuals were protected. Those without it met their demise. In January of 2024, he went away in Miami. His age was 82. His death was announced to the public by his family on the 23rd. They were silent and didn't apologize or even acknowledge the mistake. In 2022, he underwent the implantation of a new heart valve. There was a biography on the way out, titled Girl, You Know It's True. Once again, his name appeared in print and on television. Despite his lifetime of music sales in the hundreds of millions, he will forever be associated with the suffering he inflicted. Within secured enclosures. He could have said more, according to some. In his own mind, he had finally confessed to Rob and Fab what he had done to them.